I want to thank you all for having me here today. It's a great honor. It's wonderful to see everyone here and be welcomed by a community of people that does so much to promote organ donation and transplantation. I've given this talk or one similar to it several times before, so apologies if you've seen it. But I particularly enjoy sharing it with people like yourselves, where the things I'm going to be talking about directly touch on your lived experience. While I'm personally involved in organ donation, transplantation, and research, I am not myself an organ recipient, nor am I a donor family member. So I love to hear your thoughts and your feedback on the things I'm going to be talking about. So please don't hold back during the discussion and question period, because I certainly have a lot more to learn from you than you have to learn from me. Just quickly, I'm a bioethicist, so I'm a person who isn't a physician, but people could still call me doctor, but please call me Nick. Bioethicists just kind of make stuff up and try to get people to do the right thing sometimes. And sometimes they listen to us and sometimes they don't. I think what I'm going to be presenting here gives a strong argument in favor of loosening policies of mandated anonymity in deceased organ donation, but I'll leave it up for you to decide. I'm going to be talking about those policies today and why they need to be changed so that we can better support and protect deceased donors' family members and their organ recipients. So currently, as you probably already know, legislation or policy in places like Ontario prevents organ donation organizations like Trillium Gifted Life Network from disclosing the identities of deceased donors, family members, and organ recipients. And I'm going to make the case that that needs to change so that organ donation organizations can responsibly mediate direct contact between the two parties. Before I get into that, I want to draw your attention to part of what motivated us to write the article on which this talk is based. And I'm going to just mention now that I should have done a much bigger font here. I'm terrible at ad-libbing, so I've got detailed notes, but I may be skipping around a little bit as we go. So what you see here is a screenshot from a Facebook group based out of the US called Donor Families and Recipients of Organ and Tissue Transplants. As you can see here, it has over 7,000 members, but I checked yesterday and it's closer to 8,800 members now. If you take a look at the description of the group, you can see that it's designed to help deceased donors' family members and donors and recipients of their organs to find each other. So it's described as a closed group created for people looking for people associated with organ donations and transplants in the United States. And this group is a good example of the many groups like it you can find online. Here's another one which you may recognize, based out of Canada, called Canadian Transplant Recipients and Organ Donor Families Seeking Each Other. This is a group created by a very special person who happens to be in this room, whose son passed away and donated his organs, saving and improving one or more lives in the process.
All members in that, all screenshot.
Yeah, so this is an older one, 357 members. I think right now it's up to around 1,100. Yeah, that's great. So again, if you look at the description of the group, you can see that the sole purpose is to connect deceased donors' family members and organ recipients. The creator notes that privacy laws in Canada prevent the disclosure of donor family and recipient identities, even when both sides want it. And interestingly, the creator also notes that healthcare providers told her that people are increasingly seeking each other online. Now, there are lots of other groups like this. Not all of them are dedicated just to connecting deceased donors, family members, and organ recipients. There are others like this one that function as support groups, discussion boards, or information exchange forums. But even in these ones, you're going to find pleas for information from interested parties. Here's a typical one from a mother whose daughter received a liver transplant. She offers a bit of information about the transplant and then says, if you or your loved one could possibly have been your donor, I'd love to hear from you. Now, unfortunately, we don't have data on how widespread this kind of thing is. We don't know how many donor families and recipients manage to connect in this way, but we do know that it's happening. And we also know that it's probably going to happen more and more in the future as more people learn about these groups and as more groups start up. So let's ask why it's happening. First, and I think pretty obviously, it's happening because many people clearly believe that they can benefit from getting to know the people on the other side of their story. There's a kind of need, curiosity, a drive, and likely something that goes quite a lot deeper that's driving people to try to make these connections. Second, and as I mentioned earlier, it's happening because in many jurisdictions, in fact most jurisdictions worldwide, policy or legislation explicitly forbids identity disclosure, even when both sides want it. So this is why people are taking to social media as a recourse. I'm going to talk a bit about the benefits that can be realized when the two sides do manage to connect. But first, I want to talk about some history and go into the rationale for the restrictive policies, because it is important when we're discussing this issue to acknowledge that there are some good reasons behind the restrictive policies. This is a real-life photocopy of a paper published in the early 90s that I came across only recently. You can't find the paper online. I had to ask a librarian to find it for me and digitize it. I wish I found it sooner because it's a wonderfully written paper. And I encourage everyone here to read it. I'd be happy to share it through Kathleen. I do have a digital copy. And I'm going to refer back to it a few times in this talk. So, as far back as the early 90s, these authors wondered why. Why is there this restrictive policy around identity disclosure? What is the rationale? You think about it, and it's not immediately obvious why these policies are in place. In fact, maybe in your experience, certainly mine, when they tell people about the restrictive policies, many of them are quite surprised. It's not obvious to people why it exists. And I think these researchers were a little confused themselves over 30 years ago. So in the paper, they explore this question of what's the rationale here, and they address the logical follow-up question, which is, should there be contact between donor families and recipients? Does the rationale stand up to scrutiny? So let's dive into this a little bit. You may be surprised to learn that in the 60s and 70s, healthcare providers working in the donation and transplantation space did believe that donor families and organ recipients had a right to know one another or their identities, particularly because it was thought that getting to know each other could enhance meaning for both sides. But then some healthcare providers began to worry that there could be some drawbacks to allowing direct contact, and that it was possible that people could experience some unanticipated harms. For example, if an organ recipient passed away, the families who got to know them could experience what's called secondary loss, so feeling like they lost their loved one all over again. Sometimes maybe the two sides would have different expectations about the relationship, which could lead to disappointment or emotional distress. Maybe recipients would experience unwelcome feelings of indebtedness for the gift they received, or maybe they would feel an increased sense of guilt or anxiety in knowing the people that lost a loved one that led to their transplant. They might also, the healthcare providers worry that the recipient could be drawn into the family's mourning process, which could complicate recovery. There was some concern that donor families might, in rare cases, put pressure on organ recipients to live a lifestyle that they believed honored their loved one's gift of life. And in the worst case, it was feared that emotional manipulation or financial exploitation could occur. Now, while there was no evidence for these harms originally, and while what evidence there was subsequently was mostly anecdotal, more recent qualitative research out of jurisdictions where there are more permissive policies in place has found that at least a couple of these can occur in some cases when the relationships aren't managed properly or mediated properly. For example, secondary loss. or disappointment related to feelings of different expectations. So the authors of the rationale for the restrictive policy express this rationale in an eloquent way, I think. If one is concerned that contacts might carry with them some potential for harm, it's better to do or permit nothing rather than to risk doing or permitting something wrong. Therefore, this position might contend that the basic goal in all healthcare, which is to do no harm, is best served in these circumstances by prohibiting all contact between donor families and transplant recipients. In other words, even if some good could come of direct contact, the benefits aren't worth the risks. So it's these supposed risks that I was just talking about that drove jurisdictions around the world to foreclose the possibility of any harms arising by mandating strict policies of anonymity in deceased organ donation. Sometimes they did this through legislation, as in Ontario, and other places they just do it through policy, as in historically in British Columbia. And these well-intended regimes were meant to protect people who were perceived to be especially vulnerable due to their experiences with organ donation or transplantation. And for the most part, it's been that way ever since. Take a look at Ontario's enabling donation legislation as an example. There's a clause in there that says, no person shall disclose or give to any other person any information or document whereby the identity of any person may become known publicly. Historically, this hasn't put a complete moratorium on contact, but as you probably know, if donor families and recipients wanted to connect, they have to do so through anonymized letters that are mediated and anonymized through Trillium Gift of Life Network in Ontario, and the situation is the same in many other countries, although I will note that in some, not even that is allowed. If you look at some of the Facebook groups that I mentioned at the outset, you can see that there's a lot of frustration over this policy being expressed. And what's really clear, what jumps off the page, is that for some donor families and for some organ recipients, getting to know the people on the other side of their donation story is a very desirable thing. I haven't talked this long in a long time. My daughter, 17 months, does not allow it. So, why might people want to connect in this way? Well, again, we have some qualitative research here to show that there can be major benefits realized when the two sides meet. For donor families, they're often able to find more meaning in their loss. They're able to find a sense of peace or closure. They're able to complete the donor's biography, which is beautifully described as closing the circle in some qualitative literature. And they're able to see their loved one's gift of life in a more tangible form. They're often reassured by meeting a recipient that donation was the right decision, which can also help to resolve grief. And many, I think, just seem to benefit from knowing a little bit more about the recipient. For recipients, the big benefit seems to be the chance to express their gratitude in a personal way for what many understand to be a gift of life. Expressing gratitude like that can help them honor the way organ donation is often understood and portrayed as a gift, or a gift of life. So when you're given a gift, you're expected to say thank you, usually in a personalized way. But what happens when you're unable to say thank you for that gift, or unable to say thank you in a way that you find meaningful? We know from qualitative literature that this can be very, very difficult for people. And the fact is that people understand this as a gift, and for some people, an anonymized thank you is just not enough. The evidence suggests that saying thank you in a personalized, non-anonymized way can help some recipients to relieve guilt, anxiety, and distress. Other recipients also benefit from directly supporting the donor's legacy by knowing the family, and there's even a little bit of evidence to suggest that it can help with recovery. What's really cool is that you can find spontaneous expressions on these Facebook groups that seem to corroborate these research findings. So take a look at this post, for example. This is from a woman who connected in person with a family member of a donor from whom she received a heart. She talks about the experience of getting to know one another, notes that that experience changed her life, and emphasizes her belief that she and that family member now share an unbreakable bond. These sentiments are definitely shared by the donor family and recipient partners I worked with on the paper that this talk is based on. So some of you probably know these people. So Kim LeBlanc tragically lost her son Tyler in 2011, and Dave Allingham was the recipient of Tyler's heart. And about a year later, with the help of a friend and social media, Kim and Dave managed to connect in person. Both describe that experience as profoundly healing. It's brought Dave, Dave describes it as the opportunity to express his gratitude in person as an important aspect of his journey to recovery. And Kim has said that building that relationship has been profoundly healing to her. Those of you who know them probably know this too. They keep in regular touch. Their families are close friends, and they've done a lot of work in organ donation and transplantation advocacy over the years. They've joined me in giving this talk a couple of times, but I felt I can't ask them again. In fact, last summer, I think Kim's family joined Dave's in Italy for Dave's wedding, and Kim said a few words at the wedding, and I'm sure there wasn't a dry eye in the house. So I think it's hardly possible that there's a more compelling story of what can happen when the two sides get to know each other than Kim and Dave's story. What was it? Wow. And Dave's still going strong. Oh yeah? Anyway? Oh nice. It was
Dave who received the heart. Yes. His donor, it was his birthday yesterday.
Wow. Okay. So we know there are risks to direct contact. We know there can be benefits. Now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and get into why I think it's time, and hopefully some of you will agree with me, to rethink the current regime of mandated anonymity. And here I'm going to focus on two arguments. The first you're probably familiar with. It's a moral argument. It's been around for a long time. And the second is a pragmatic argument. So first, the moral argument. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. We know from qualitative research that deceased donors' families have for a long time been frustrated by the apparent journalism of donation and transplantation legislation imposing these policies of anonymity. The basic idea here is if donor family members are understood to be competent to make these major decisions around consent for organ donation, why do we think they're incapable of deciding for themselves on this issue? So why the paternalism is what they're asking. Organ recipients voice a similar frustration with a restrictive policy that forces them to make these depersonalized expressions of gratitude. So I just want to share a couple of quotes from a qualitative interview study done in the late 90s with heart recipients who were obliged by the existing policy in their donor service area in the United States to make their expressions of gratitude through depersonalized letters. One participant says, "I don't know how to say thank you without being personal, so I haven't done that. Stop them from writing a letter." "I just don't know where to go with it," said another participant. "I just don't know how to do it properly." Again, stop them from writing a letter. I think here I'll just pause and say it's interesting and worth noting that the anguish that's expressed by these heart recipients and the anguish that we see on Facebook groups from donor family members is actually exacerbated by this mandated anonymity policy that's supposed to protect them from harm. So a policy that's meant to protect people from harm is actually causing real harm, be of a slightly different kind. So the moral argument is autonomy based. It's basically saying if donor families are understood to be competent to make substitute judgments about organ donation, and if organ recipients are understood to be competent to consent to major surgery, why on earth do we think they're incapable of deciding for themselves whether they might benefit from getting to know the other side if both sides agree? So competent adults should have the right to decide for themselves. I said I wasn't going to spend too much time on this because that argument has been percolating in the donation and transplantation communities for a long time. Certainly some jurisdictions internationally were moved by it. So I think I mentioned that the United States and Israel have been mediating direct contact for a while. There has been movement in places like the UK, Australia, and Italy to open things up. The UK allows it, Italy and Australia are moving in that direction. More notable and interesting, and many of you probably know this, in Canada we now have 3 provinces that have established mechanisms for identity disclosure. BC, Alberta, and Nova Scotia. And Quebec is about to implement a pilot program this year.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I just found that out a week ago, so not too far behind. Yeah. So where am I going here?
Do you know information on that? I mean, if somebody had a transplant in Quebec, but the organs came from Ontario, I did find out that donations done in Ontario go still
Really?
Okay.
Because it's too far, I guess.
Not necessarily, it's just how I do that. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
I mean, unless there's obviously a need, and
Yeah.
there's no recipient.
Well, I don't get into this in this particular talk, but this lack of harmonization between the provinces is a huge problem. Unless both the donor and the recipient are in Quebec, they're not going to be able to facilitate contact. It's the same thing for the other provinces that the donor and recipient are, but yeah, it's a pity. That's an argument for harmonization. Let's move in the direction of these other provinces. Okay, so the moral argument, historically, it's not been enough to stimulate change to policy. I think the prevailing view has been that while the moral argument is somewhat persuasive, it's not really enough to justify changing things because things seem to be working okay despite the frustration of some people, and it's best not to rock the boat. So I'm going to bring us around now to the pragmatic argument for rethinking mandated anonymity, and this brings us back to social media. So as I mentioned, in those places where restrictive policies remain in place, people are taking to social media to find each other. And I want to take a minute now to look a little more closely to see how they're doing it so that you can see too. It's pretty smart. So earlier we saw a post in which someone sought to identify someone by providing some details of the transplant in the hopes that someone would recognize those details. That's typical of a lot of what you see online, but there are also other more sophisticated ways. For example, this is a post from a person who not only shares the details of her daughter's donation, she also shares the anonymized letters that she received from recipients through Trillion Gift of Life Network. I have blocked those out, but I can assure you that they're very moving. They say, here are the actual letters we've received as a family, and hopefully someone out there will recognize their letter and be able to get in touch with us. Even more sophisticated is the strategy used by the groups dedicated to connecting people that I showed at the outset, based in Canada and the US. So in this group, parties are encouraged to enter relevant details into spreadsheets, and then by cross-checking, administrators can determine likely donor. No?
No, because this is the area group where I base my group on.
Yep.
We do not do that, and they have to.
Users do it.
They have to go on to these spreadsheets and find the information, the email, and contact each other. We do not do the matches.
Okay. So users do it.
You have to, yes.
Yeah, okay. They can identify one another and get in contact. So, people are finding each other, we know that. We know that they think they can benefit. But really important to keep in mind here, for the purposes of the pragmatic argument, is that people are also, perhaps unknowingly, exposing themselves to risks, and there's nobody there to support them. This is a post from a person whose son donated his heart to a man who she recently learned is not doing well. This person admittedly had not even met this recipient yet, and yet they appear to be experiencing a form of secondary loss that would only have been aggravated had she met him. She says, "It hit me as if my son was dying all over again." So the pragmatic argument is this. The rise of social media is gradually making restrictive policies obsolete. People now can and do find each other, and when they do, certainly they may benefit, but they're also exposing themselves to risks, and there's nobody there to support them. We have to address the risks of the new reality brought on by social media, because right now, it's a bit of a wild west. The point is that the concerns that once spoke for the need for restrictive policies now speak to the need for responsible oversight. By no means am I saying that there should be an end to gatekeeping entirely. Mutual identity disclosure is definitely not for everyone. It's probably not for most. Anonymity is still a right for those who want it. What I am saying is that there needs to be responsible policy in place to help protect and support people, whether they want to meet or not. The arguments I just presented might lead you to conclude that we should take a kind of laissez-faire approach, where we have a maximally open and autonomy-promoting system where everyone can connect with everyone, but I think you'll agree with me that a smarter course here would be the middle road. The authors of the paper expressed this rationale for this middle road here, I think, in an eloquent way. They asked, is it appropriate to adopt a position concerning contact between donor families and transplant recipients, in which there is in principle no roadmap for risks, in which freedom is so highly valued that potentially inappropriate behaviors are sanctioned? In such a case, might not a legitimate concern for liberty become an unwitting accomplice of license? I told you it was a beautifully written paper. In other words, a free-for-all would be a lot worse than a restrictive policy. The right solution is a middle road, responsible oversight with protections and guardrails. The irony is that in places like Ontario, the very legislation that's designed to protect people is now a barrier to developing responsible oversight that can protect and support them in the age of social media. Organ donation organizations like Trillium Gift of Life Network really can't do anything to mediate direct contact without breaking the law. And that's why I think it's time for change. It's time for legislation to change to allow organ donation organizations to develop policy for mediating direct contact for those who want it, and for helping to protect the anonymity of those who don't. What do people think about this in Canada? Well, attitudes at least 10 years ago were mixed. A survey of members of the Canadian Society of Transplantation from 2015 found that when asked whether recipients and donor families should be allowed to meet, 53% said sure, 27% said no, and 20% weren't sure. But then, when asked whether things needed to be reevaluated in light of social media are coming about, 38% said, yeah, we should take another look at the policy and think about it, but nothing happened. So that's from 10 years ago. We don't know where things stand now. But whatever the current level of support, we think there's no option but to face up to the new reality of social media. We need to explore viable alternatives to the current regime. What would a revamped policy look like? I don't have all the answers to that. I don't have a fully developed policy in mind, but we do have other jurisdictions that we can look to for guidance. And there have been some useful studies exploring ways to facilitate direct contact that confers benefits on both sides while mitigating the risks involved. For example, research has shown that when both sides meet, having a mediator there can be helpful for managing expectations and helping to deal with any unforeseen difficulties. In some jurisdictions, these are donation and transplant coordinators members who have a prior relationship with the donor family and or the transplant recipient. Research also suggests that a so-called cooling off period of about a year allows families some time to process their loss, as well as for organ recipients to recover their health. So it's advisable to wait a little while. As well, it can be helpful if before identity disclosure, the two sides agree on expectations for the relationship to avert disappointment. And pre-counseling is known to be helpful for ensuring the two parties are adequately prepared and in the right state of mind before identity disclosure. For those donor families and recipients who do not want to meet, having resources available that give guidance on how to protect anonymity when using social media is useful. There are, however, some challenges that need to be resolved, and I haven't seen these addressed in the literature in any great detail, but I don't want to downplay them. The first of these concerns organ donation organization liability. So currently, since most organ donation organizations do not play any role in introducing donor families and recipients, they can be held liable for any adverse outcomes that might arise from these meetings. But if they facilitate the meetings, could they be held liable for any reason if a relationship were to go awry? This question may have different answers depending on the jurisdiction or local legislative regimes or frameworks. But I raise it because it's the sort of worry that gives organ donation organization decision makers pause. So it's something they'll want an answer to. So I think having some legal minds think through this would be useful. The second challenge is a familiar one, namely who's going to pay for this? What resources will be needed? Where's the funding going to come from? I think there's a good case to be made that finding the resources for this is actually in the interest of organ donation organizations, and we can talk about that later. But the fact is that the healthcare sector is struggling, and this may be an added cost that policymakers may not want to consider for budgetary reasons. Another issue here is what should happen when donor family members disagree with each other over whether to disclose identity. If my dad discloses his identity, then my identity is disclosed by association. Who should have the right to decide? Would it be the substitute decision maker? If not, how would family consensus be assessed? Should any member of the family have a kind of veto power? And if so, how would that look? What would that look like? So the point here is that the privacy rights of different parties need to be carefully balanced in scenarios where there's disagreement, but how exactly to do that, I think, needs some further thinking. A fourth problem concerns who's going to be responsible for assessing whether the two parties are in the right frame of mind for mutual identity disclosure. I can imagine cases where the person tasked with connecting donor families and recipients judges that identity disclosure would be a bad thing for one party or the other at that time. But that would put them in a very difficult position. So how are autonomy considerations to be balanced with the duty to avoid harm in such situations? Who should be making those decisions? On what grounds should they be making those decisions? This is a scenario that I think any policies should have contingency plans for ahead of time. Finally, there's the fact that, and I'd love to get your perspectives on this after, but there's the question of whether the mere fact that donor family and recipient contact policies have been liberalized will change expectations. So in cases where one party wants contact but the other doesn't, for example, is that going to exacerbate the frustrations that we already see on these Facebook groups? Will recipients feel an added responsibility to make contact or an added sense of burden? At this point, and in the absence of any qualitative research on this topic, it's difficult to say. I do think that there are probably good answers to these questions, and there's solutions that can be explored, but it is important to acknowledge that changing policy in places like Ontario is not all going to be smooth sailing. There are some things we need to think about. We can also think about looking to other jurisdictions for guidance. So it's going to be interesting, for example, to see how Nova Scotia's new policy is playing out. They only put it in a couple of years ago. BC has been doing this for a while now. I think 2019 or 2020 is when they got rolling. There, the entire process is contingent on both sides wanting it. So unless both sides independently and spontaneously express an interest in identity disclosure, it can't happen. People have to wait at least 12 months. During that period, there needs to be an anonymous letter exchange both ways, at least once. And after that, both parties go through a kind of consent process where the risks are explained to them, and they're asked to sign a consent and release form. Crucially, a social worker is involved at every step of the way in this process, including facilitating first meetings or mediating. There are also other jurisdictions that we can look to that have a much longer history of this. In Israel, for example, initial meetings are mediated by transplant coordinators, and there's some interesting research that's emerged from there. We could also draw on other models that have been used in some places, for example, for donor-conceived people or adopted people. So in these models, people can register their preferences regarding information and identity disclosure, and as well as pursuing contact. And then an outside agency tailors support services according to the party's needs and circumstances. So a system like that would be one way of protecting the anonymity of those who want it, while also facilitating contact for those who want that. So just quickly, I'll tell you kind of what our current initiatives are on the research front. Right now, I'm working with collaborators in Quebec, Ontario, and BC on a review of all published research on this. That's how I came across that photocopied article that I had to hunt down. What we want to do is look at everything that's ever been written on the topic and basically draw key insights that will inform policy development once we get that legislation opened up in Ontario. Additionally, we're working with BC Transplant on a descriptive study of their program. So one of the worries, as I mentioned, that organ donation organizations have is that they simply won't have the resources to manage these relationships and the processes associated with identity disclosure in terms of human resources, administrative costs, and time, etc. So by demonstrating, we hope, at least in BC, that it's not a huge drain on resources, we're going to be able to show organizations like Trillium Gift of Life Network that in reality, they have nothing to fear. Finally, we're in the early stages of conducting a large-scale qualitative study with donor families and organ recipients who do manage to connect to better understand their experiences and motivations. And the findings will hopefully inform iterative program development down the road. So what can we do now in Ontario? So, as I said, we don't have a fully developed policy in mind. We think that something should be done in the interest of donor families and recipients. First, we need to continue the research. Organ donation organizations need to see not only that non-anonymized contact benefits donor families and recipients, but also that program development is feasible. Second, we need to keep up the advocacy. Here's where you can help if you're on board with this. So we're calling for legislative change to allow organ donation organizations to develop responsible policy here. I think that's going to take time in places like Ontario, but it's also going to take a lot of letters to MPPs. We'd like to assemble a working group, which is kind of already nascent at this point, but it's going to be exploring the issue of mandated anonymity in Ontario. It will include healthcare providers, organ donation and transplantation, bioethicists, legal scholars, of course, donor families and recipients, and others. And then once the legislation is changed, we're envisioning a kind of stepwise approach where we take the research and the strategies we learn about from other jurisdictions and feed it into policy that's developed and tested, and all that would be coupled with consultation and evaluation to see how it works and how it can be iteratively improved as we move along and learn more. This is obviously a lot of work. It's not going to be easy, but as these people said in their beautiful paper, clearly this position is not the simple one, but then life, death, organ and tissue donation, and transplantation are also not simple. I think that they wisely remind us toward the end of their paper that the policies and practices in this area must above all be based on the needs of those whom they primarily are meant to serve, and I think that currently policies and practices are failing in this regard in Ontario. So my takeaway message for you from this talk is that social media has really changed the game here. We think it's time to face up to that. Whatever the ultimate parameters of a less restrictive policy, a balanced approach to donor family and recipient contact would help protect anonymity for those who want it and responsibly facilitate contact for those who don't. I quickly thank my colleagues who worked with me on this project, Matt Slesserev, Charles Vare at Western University, Michael Ward at Predictive Life Network, and Dave Allingham and Kim LeBlanc, our donor family and recipient partners here. Be happy to share a list of further reading for anyone who's interested. There's some great stuff on this topic. I can share it with Kathleen and she can circulate it. And I asked Kathleen if I could do this, so I'm going to quickly plug an event. This year, this year I'm co-chairing the New Canvas of Life fundraising event in London, and I'd like to invite you all to attend. New Canvas of Life, we have it every year. It's a fun-filled evening celebrating local artists, and it's in support of the multi-organ transplant program at London Health Sciences Centre. To date, we've raised over $500,000 over the years. Yep. And it's been going for 6, I've only been on it for 3, so, but still. The event usually includes live music, art auction, entertainment. This year we had John Allen, Barry Oyster coming to play. There's usually, and there will be some cocktails and hors d'oeuvres and things like that, and then a couple of speeches from very interesting speakers. April's a long way off, but please mark your calendars, and if you can make it, I promise you'll have a good time while contributing to a great cause. Thank you very much. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and really, I'd be happy to have this be more of a conversation. I was serious when I said it. I'd love to hear your perspectives and learn from you guys, because every time I've given this talk, I learn something completely new that I feed into the next version of the talk, and I'd love to hear your perspectives on everything that was talked about.
So the question is just feedback. Hi everyone. I think I know a lot of people here, but I'm Cindy Simon. I'm the admin for that community transplant group. So I know a lot about donor families and I know a lot about recipients. The one thing I always wanted to talk about is that the day tragedy hit and my son passed away. And I'm sitting in the hospital, he's in the ICU, and he's not going to make it. He signed to be a donor. So obviously they came to me. They asked me, as a mom, as a parent, am I okay with that? I had the ability to change it. I could have stopped him. He signed to be a donor. Why do I have the right as a mom? Am I confident? Everything you talked about, do I have the capability to make that decision? But I did. I could have stopped him being an organ donor. They don't want to fight with the families. So, no, I didn't obviously have it. But for a second I thought about it. His lifeless body was lying there. He's an identical twin. We don't know why he died. And do they need him to make sure that his twin was going to be okay? And that was the question I asked. What do you need to do to make sure that his twin is not going to lose his life as well? But here we are talking about going the other side of our story. So you're letting me make a decision to stop organ donation. And we know that only 1% of the population can be a natural deceased donor based on the way somebody does. So if we can make that decision and stop it, why can't we make the decision that if the other side wants to meet us, then we should meet? I really, I don't comprehend any of this. And cooling off period, it's been almost 4 years. I'm not cool on. I'm not over it. I'm moving forward because I have no choice. Because donor families don't have a choice. We don't. But through this group and through the help of Pat, who has the American group that you saw here, I've met other donor moms like myself, lost tragedies, who are sitting right here, right? Heather and Deborah, who all lost our children tragically. No warning, no nothing. But here we are. And we support organ donation. Our kids save lives. And we're very proud of our children or our decisions if they've been signed to do so. I don't know what else to say. Like, it's just like fighting for the ability to know the other side. But what they told us also is somebody who may have received, just say a man who received your son's liver, he may not be somebody that you would want to marry your daughter. Yeah, we're told that all the time. Maybe they're not living a great life. Maybe they needed liver because they were alcoholics and they're drinking like crazy and they got their new liver and they're drinking again. You know, like it's possible. We don't know. We don't know, but it's a gift, and we know that. So all I can say is that I hope this works, and I hope that we can know the other side if we want to. We have a lot of decisions to make when we are faced with tragedies like ours, and it's very easy to say no. You know, and a lot of people in this room would not be here if we said no. And that's all I have to say. Thanks.
October 16th, 2020. Oh, this is Kate, my daughter, and her non-recipient gave me this T-shirt. You can see on the back. And honestly, like I said, you got her lungs, that you really had her heart. Katie gifted her heart, liver, and lungs. We just got her. We wrote anonymous letters. Katie's story was actually published in April 21 through University Health Network, and it was about organ donation during the pandemic. And from that, I posted it, I think in Pat's group, Cindy's group hasn't started yet, and anyway, so I shared it, and within 12 hours, I got an email. I think I'm the girl you're looking for. I wasn't looking for my recipient. She found me, and I said, okay, you know, let's share a little info, no, not much more. And I said, talk to your mom. I don't want you, you know, Kate was 27, Isabel was 28. And so we sent anonymous letters through Trillion, but we both took photos before, and then it arrived Mother's Day. We met in August, and it was an amazing reunion with my family, and I just hugged her, and I just said, breathe. I just have to feel Kate together. And Katie, I think, led me to Isabel. I think that's the one thing I would say that wasn't kind of described here, like in your talk, about how it feels for the donor families, is it feels like a real connection to your child or your loved one that is the donor. And I'm not a spiritual person, but there was that feeling of connection that she was just meeting me there. And it was a gift because Isabel ended up Katie gave her lungs for 2.5 years with her lungs, and her lungs were failing. Katie's lungs were failing, and so she received new lungs a year and a half ago. And but she still, you know, she would have had her original lung for surgery, and she posted a picture of my daughter. You know, it was she got her there. It was still a life-saving situation, and I'll always be grateful for that. And I their journey is as well. So it's been quite, quite an experience for me. And when we knew that Isabel was back on the transplant list again, I have two sons. My oldest son said, "Kate can only die once." And that was really helpful because there is that sense of loss again. But what was really interesting, just by chance, I'm a realtor in Toronto, and I was doing an open house, and this guy came up to me, saw my green ribbon, which is on the jacket, and asked me about it. And he said, my life was saved through the skin donation. I said, well, that's interesting because Katie gave skin as well. And I don't even think about that. I think about organs. The very same day I'm getting a call as Mel has a new lungs. So it was kind of like Kate reminding me, like, don't forget, Mom, I did the other two, but there's the skin too. So, that's what I mean. I feel like she just shows me things, and it brings a lot of comfort.
Hi, my name is Recipients, and I received a heart transplant in September 2022. It was a high-profile case that my kids investigated. I was at a doctor's appointment, and he was on the same street as the shooting. And I went in. I felt something, like you said, just a calling. So I went to the parking lot and said a prayer. And outside the building, someone came outside the building. And I had told him that I was in the hospital following the shooting. And it's always been on my mind. So I wanted to come and show my condolences. He went through the whole event and then said, "You said you were in the hospital. Why were you in the hospital? Are you okay?" I said, "I was waiting for a transplant." He looked down. He said, "What date was that?" I said, "September 18th. He said, "You received someone's heart." I was wrong. And that's how it came to me, my daughter. So it was just the third anniversary in September. He broke down and he saw me. So I would wonder if I'm doing him any good by showing up. And for me, it was a relief. Just walking away, it was like, okay, now, here's my show this thing. And I do something good. He wanted me to come into the shop and meet everyone. They were all with him, and I said, no, I can't, because I have that respect for the family, and they don't know I know. So until they give me permission, I can't do it.
I have two questions. One is, do you know how long the project and policy is likely to take, especially if you're going to read all that literature, because that's global literature? So that's the first question. And then the second one is just based off of Cindy's comment about saying no. Do you think that Canada or Ontario will adopt the opt-out policy?
I feel like I should be sitting down because this isn't real. Everyone's kind of sharing a really amazing things. I'll just comment quickly on what you said. I don't think you're doing wrong to that person. I really don't. Just even if he's having a very strong emotional response, what he said is going to be fine. You know what I mean? I think that you have nothing to feel that we're doing wrong. And if he wanted you to come into the shop, I think it was profoundly meaningful for him that you were there. Meredith, the time thing, all that politics or all that work probably 2 or 3 years. The real thing is like, how quickly can we get some evidence in front of the policymakers to say, look, let's go. Here's the evidence. Like the BC program, they've had this open. Admittedly, they're a much smaller program than Ontario, but the proportion of people who actually want to do this is surprisingly low. So all that to say, it's not a drain on resources, so not a major drain on resources. And it's to the advantage of donation organizations to change policy, I think, because if you have relationships that go awry and that filters to the media, that's not good for organizational transportation. With respect to what Cindy was saying about the people about saying no, there are jurisdictions where, and I think on paper it's this way even in Ontario, where the family has no right of veto. It's this way in the Netherlands recently, so they have to opt out and everything. And the family has no right of veto. Same thing in Quebec. In practice, the family has a right of veto. Because even though, I think that there are a couple of things that people consider here. One is that when you sign a donor card, a lot of people don't have a real sense of what's involved in organ donation. Like, because as many of you know, it's very difficult for the family. And people, when you sign your driver's license, you don't know that it might take an extra 72 hours of you being sustained with somatic support technologies in the hospital. If you knew that, would you want to put your family through it? So, we can talk about principles and moral principles and all this kind of stuff in one sense when we're, like me sitting in academia. But I think the healthcare providers situationally, it's a situated reality where they say, this person is just lost the most important person to them in their life. Am I really going to say, no, sorry, we're doing this when it's going to potentially cause them extreme stress? I think it's a lot to ask healthcare providers to do that. At the same time, I think there's a right way to approach it. One is by not opening by saying, are you okay with that? You simply inform the family member, as they do in the Netherlands. You say, did you know that your loved one was a donor? You know what I mean? I think in Quebec they do this as well. You don't invite a veto, but if the family has a strong feeling about it, and I don't know, it's a really difficult. Whether Ontario moves to opt out, I think will depend largely on what happens in Nova Scotia. They need some years to determine what effect it had there on donation rates and how people perceive it. I think there's a worry that it could have a pernicious consequence in that you might actually end up with fewer donors for various reasons. But so they want to wait and see what the numbers are. And then the other thing about the changing the policy legislation, I learned this in one of my talks from somebody who knows something about this, was when you open up a piece of legislation like the Trillion Gift of Life Network Act, you open up the whole thing. And that's when they can go in and make changes that TGLN doesn't like. You expose yourself. So even if TGLN is fully on board with this, they want to have their ducks in a row before the legislation gets opened up. So it may be that this is changing this legislation is just one part of a larger legislative change that may include opt-out. I don't know. The timeline on that, I have no idea.
Hi, my name is Catherine, and I am a recipient of art. And what touched me too is the social media aspect, because I am very much on social media, and I have written to my donor's family, and I'm so lucky to have received letters back. And in one of the letters, I realized that my donor was male, and it was his mother writing to me. And in one of her letters, she had stated that on a separate piece of paper, she was going to provide me with her phone number and her email address. And of course, it wasn't allowed to be given to me. And I kind of felt the same way about the letter that I was going to write to, the letter I did write to my donor's mom, that it wasn't, I couldn't make it very personal. And truly express my thanks. In my last letter, I was able to talk a bit more about myself because she wanted to know more about my journey, but at the same time, it was hard because I didn't want to talk about myself. I really wanted to know about him. And so I've asked that in my last letter, but I just recently sent out last week. But I did go on social media, and I did something very similar. I created a video, and I shared the stationery of the paper she sent with the letter on, hoping maybe it would reach her. Unfortunately, it hasn't. But I'm hoping maybe one day it will be able to connect. But yeah, it is difficult because I feel like you want that connection just to have to say thank you in person. And I mean, just share more about yourself and your journey because, like, personally, my journey hasn't been the easiest. Like, and I think it hurts me to know that she's lost her son. So I always say one donation is really bittersweet because as one of you mourns, the other celebrates. But I do understand, like, loss because I've had a lot of loss in my own family, and their gift saved me and prevented further heartache in my family because what was happening to me was a genetic condition that already took my dad and my sister. So you're just kind of left with this, like you kind of feel a little bit empty because you can't. I did express that in my last letter, but I think it's so important to write these letters too, and I noticed that you stated that some people don't know what to say. But I think if you come across people like that, just tell them to write a letter, even if all it says is thank you on it, because I think that would mean so much to donor families. Yeah. That's all I have to say.
Well, thank you for
Write a
sharing.
letter.
Yeah.
I just want to say I didn't want Trillium Gift of Life to attend, but they did one.
They've seen this before. They're tired.
Hi, my name is Tom, and I'm kidney recipient for 46 years. And without my donor signing that card, I wouldn't be here. There'd be no story to say. There'd be no sunshine. I would see my kids growing up. Some of them get married. Some of them get divorced. But I know there's some donors family here, and I want to say thank you.
Hi, Nick, I just wanted to say thank you so much for bringing this to our attention. I think this work is very, very important. I'm a heart transplant recipient 2018. I did send a letter, never heard back, and it's just a vacuum that has not been any filled. I'm hearing echoes of that.
Write another letter.
I can't do that.
They're not all received.
I've talked to the news coordinator about that, and I was advised not to, which is another thing that I think is very important. They need to have a process that mediates this. There has to be policies and procedures. There has to be a well thought out approach and a team that helps people through the process, both on the donor side and on the recipient side. So I think that whatever you need, I'll be there to help you. It's very important. Thank you so much.
Thanks for saying that.
They also don't tell you if your recipients are still alive. I hate to say it that way, but I found out about one of them passing away after calling after a year, contacting my partner, and getting the bad news first that from the group is that the recipient passed away. The family's just a little blurb, and then everything else about every other recipient. Probably could as our recipients and this, but again, that's all we do. But in many cases, like I know that another recipient passed away because I was in contact with him and his family, but children tell you nothing. It's nice to call.
You're zero, right? They got the best gift, but it's like, yeah, I'm not asking for compensation, it's just like there's that organization. I get more support through other families I've met through things, and I am a speaker with the high school outreach initiative, and that fills me a little bit, and that's one thing, but yeah, I get no, yeah,
They're not great for us.
there's no need, but there's no.
So I'm really sorry to hear that. I mean, that's a common thing I hear is that people, not just in Ontario, feel unsupported after the donation. The support services at TGLN I can't speak to, but I will just mention that Mike Ward is the biggest advocate of changing this legislation of anybody can be. Yeah. He's bound, and several people in TGLN are extremely militant about changing this for the benefit of donor families and recipients, but they're bound by legislation. The
He should
TGLN
start
Act,
giving an update then to donor
Yeah.
families that he should be reaching out to us and saying, gee, this is what we're doing.
You know, especially when there's been 6 or 8 recipients, you know, in our cases, they're not going to contact all of us and say that, just to know that one of the recipients has passed away. They're not going to do that. If you call, Mike has been great at to give me that update. But again, it's follow-up. I haven't done it in a few years. I haven't heard back from most of the recipients. And honestly, I don't know if they're alive. I mean, I pray they are. Because obviously that's why we do this.
Well, Kathleen is an incredible, like, example of how she lives life so fully.
Yeah.
And I love that.
I'm Linda, as a lot of you know. I see it from multi-sides. I'm a 4-time living donor. And
Sorry.
That's an on-card group you didn't mention.
Yeah.
Living donors.
Yeah.
In 2002, I donated bone marrow. 2003, liver sites. In 2004, stem cells. I was one of the first unrelated stem cell donors to go through McMaster Hospital in Hamilton. With that, I actually sent a card each time to the family. You probably know the little thing, footprints in the sand, the little bookmark thing, like a credit card size. I sent that with one of the cards. It was returned to me because that was a gift. I couldn't send a gift. That hurt. I did ask. I picked one of my donations as a date, and I would ask for a health update. 6 years, a little over 6 years later, I found out that they had passed. But after the stem cell donation, they had told me, okay, you've done enough for this person, we can't take you anymore. My first thought was my recipient needed me and they didn't contact me, and then I dropped to the side. I was really upset about that at the time. And yes, I found out they passed. It was actually New Year's Eve I found out. It was a really sad New Year's Eve for me because I didn't know this person. All I knew was a little person because of how much bone marrow they took. And the surgeon at Princess Margaret had let it slip that it was off continent. So my donations were going off continent. I had a dream that it was a little boy, dark complexion, running towards me. In my mind, it was a little boy from South America somewhere. Is what's still in the back of my mind this many years later. But I gave them 6 years that they probably would not have had with their family. So for that, I am truly thankful. Now, another angle of it, in April of 2014, Mike heart issues. We were out for a walk, he couldn't catch his breath. July of 2015, he received a heart. He sent 2 letters. But a year and a half after the transplant and the second letter had gone, the last day before Christmas, we received a letter back from the donor family. They did not want to stay in touch, but they did give us some information about the donor. He likes strong black coffee. Mike insists on having at least 2 copies a day.
Did he report?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
Yeah, the guy, his donor, I always thought he had a woman's heart because he couldn't stop talking right after transplant. I was wrong. The gentleman, he likes the strong black coffee, chili, apple pie, fiddleheads fried in butter, everything matched. Teasing the nieces and nephews and doing the crazy driver thing. And those of you who know Mike, he used to race sidecars, so the crazy driver part comes in there. The only thing that didn't match, Mike is a veteran, so things have to be on time. Apparently his donor, if you wanted him to show up for supper at 6, you told him 3 and he was still late. So, so from that, we would love to meet the family, and we would love to be in contact, but they did say in that letter, now he's just had his 10th year, and we wondered if we should send another letter just to give another update, because the other one was received about 2.5 years after.
How you got all that information and one letter back, and did that come through Trillium?
It came through Trillium.
So how are they allowed to give you all that personal information back?
It's not identified.
But us as recipients, we're allowed to do nothing. We just do this.
You can't give your name or.
So you just can't say one name. You can't say my name is Mary. I'm 50 years old and I'm from Toronto.
I understand that.
Everything else you can say.
But we were told to keep it not personalized.
Write what you want. Don't take out what you
Well,
want. I had my letters are this long.
and I feel that door is not closed because I feel that connection was never made.
Right.
And I don't know whether my thank you ever got there. Right. So as a recipient, I understand you as the family's. But I also have to realize that on my anniversary where I was so happy, I know in my heart that somebody is suffering another anniversary of a loss.
But
And that's hard on our side as well.
You're absolutely right. You didn't cause what happened to our
I
children or loved
understand
ones.
that.
But this is knowing that all of you are doing well. You have no choice but to move forward. That's
Absolutely.
right. So, right, but in a happy way.
Yes.
Right. It's different for us. Yes, do we miss our person or our children or loved ones? Of course we do. Every day.
You were suffering.
I just see it, I see it as my daughter graduated. I feel like our life here on earth is for giving and acquiring knowledge, and it's a training ground for whatever comes next. So that's the thing. But I also treat that day, first of all, there's the day that she was declared. She was declared brain dead. But, she was on life support a couple of days earlier. So I don't really even know when did she really die, and then there's the date of the transplants. So the day of the transplants, which is October 19th, I call that her new life birthday. So that changes my attitude a lot about, like my loss, it's like her new life birthday.
Yeah.
She's still living, she's still keeping people
On
alive.
the anniversary of my transplant, it was my new birthday.
Right,
I call it my new birthday.
exactly.
5 years. And I thank you. Thank you all of you.
And I say, don't thank me, thank Brian. He made the decision. That's right, Carla, but it wasn't my decision, it was my son's decision.
Any of us as recipients,
I've been an advocate for years and became stronger when Mike received the heart and needed the heart. We got into it even when he was on the list. But the thing that I found talking with a lot of people over the years is getting like donor families that told me getting a thank you from a recipient is a bond. Like it's, might not have been their actual, but they at least know the recipients are appreciative of it.
I have 4 letters I never received, and what's taking them so long? Send me a thank you. But not everybody wants to know, and not everybody wants to communicate, and I have to respect that. It's a gift. They didn't do it for any other reason, but it's a gift.
Well, for me, it's not even a thank you. It's just I have received letters from all 3, and it's really very much my turn to write back, to be honest, and I want to do that. It's on my list of things to do. But to know that to have them say that they've been able to attend their son's graduation or wedding or something like that, those milestones my daughter didn't get to have, but it's like, that was okay. That was her timeline. It was out of her control. But to know that other people got to keep living and doing things as a result of her.
Yeah, it's both. And as I said, I felt both sides.
Yeah.
And in January of 2019, well, the year before, we were walking around the motorcycle show in Toronto, and I said to my friend who needed a kidney, I said, "What's your blood type, Lindsay?" Just out of the blue. Told her, same as mine. I turned to Mike and immediately said, "I'm giving Lindsay a kidney." And Mike says, "Well, just go to it." But no. And a year later, almost a year, within a week. A year later, I gave him a kidney. He's now living out on Gabriella Island, which is just by Nanaimo, Vancouver Island. And he's had a few health issues through the time. This past summer, he had a serious one that had him hospitalized for quite a while, but he's on the mend now. So I'm thankful for it, and he is a friend, so we don't have that part. But I was actually doing a booth in April for organ donation at our local farmers market in Guelph. And this story gives me goosebumps every time I say it. I would explain to this person, yes, you should register, it'll show on the back of your health card, da-da-da-da-da-da. He looks at me, very distinguished man, with a little hat on, European descent of some sort. He says, "Really? I register? That's a contract? And my family can say no?" Yes, that's the way it is. He thinks for a minute, he says, "I'm not going to do it because it'll cost me money, but I'm going to tell them if they don't follow my wishes, they're out of the will." So that just put a little bit of a spin on it. It is the way. By the time the will, and then he continued on, he said, by the time the will is read, it'll be too late. They'll already follow my wishes. Anybody else have any?
Hi, I'm Heather. I can cry. Just wanted to say, that's why it's so important to let your family know. And what Cindy said. And with my son, I would have said no. I would have donated his organs. And but my daughter said, "Oh yes, he signed his license." Back then, there wasn't the registry. So that was why I said yes. But you have to